Following from the last week, we are taking a look at a few more stories about haunted objects. As I already explained last week, Koreans tend to assume that it's the human obsession that haunts an object. For that reason, stuffs that are handled and used close to human bodies are considered the most common culprits, such as a piece of clothing, jewelry, and mirror that is used to reflect human face and body. Today's stories do reflect that notion, but not all. Seems like just about everything can be haunted with enough context after all. So, here are 3 allegedly true stories from Korea about haunted objects. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by your host, Anthony. More than 10 years ago, I was a high schooler. One day I went to Namdaemun Market with a friend and saw these old vintage jeans. They were worn out with holes at the knees and very cool. There was a stain on one thigh, but it was faint. And above all, they were cheap despite being Levi's. I was very happy with the score. Mom made a passing comment about buying an old used clothes, but didn't say more hearing how cheap they were. So I wore it around for a few days and started feeling pain about my thigh. Stinging pain as if something was stabbing me there, but I just thought I might have pulled my muscle or something. Then I had a dream in which a man looking at his 30s held onto my legs asking to return his jeans. He was bleeding from his thigh, but what really scared me were his hateful eyes. I woke up while struggling to get free from him. I was stunned to find there was what looked like a handprint on my leg. And the same dream returned for good 10 days, and during those 10 days, the handprint turned to bruise. I felt as if somebody snatched my leg and broke my arm. I was also nearly hit by a car at a crosswalk. I got scared for the series of bizarre experiences and confided what was happening to me to Mom. She reiterated that she didn't feel good about the jeans from the beginning and told me to bring it out. When I did, she pointed out the stain on the thigh. I was surprised to find the stain now looking more prominent and darker, like a blood stain. Mom checked through the jeans inside out and found a patch stitched behind the pocket. Inside it was a photo of a man. While Mom let out a low moan, I couldn't believe my eyes, because the man in the photo was the man in my dream. Mom promptly called her sister, a devout Buddhist, and she connected us to the monk she'd been known for decades. When we brought the jeans to him, he simply told me to be careful what I buy in the future and took the jeans. Later I heard he performed a ritual to comfort the soul and burned the jeans. And just like that, everything returned to normal. No more dreams, no more pains, and no more accidents. Now, I never buy a second-hand goods. "5 years ago, I was a teenager. One day I joined my dad to his midnight fishing trip. By the time we arrived at the lake, the sky was orange-red with the sunset, and daytime anglers were packing to live. The lake must be a popular spot for anglers. Though the lake was tucked away further in the forest, there was a small shabby 24-hour open shop by the lake that also sold fishing baits and fishing hooks. A bit away from the shop was a sort of dumping ground, which was odd. I first thought it to be a junk yard, but upon closer inspection, it looked more like somebody randomly threw away his or her stuff in a pile. The night went smoothly. There were other anglers around, some more passionate ones even with a full camping gear and tent, and despite the silence and darkness, I didn't find it spooky. We caught a few big carps, and as we packed it up by the dawn, we were in a good spirit, if a bit tired. In the morning light, I gave a second look at the pile of dumps next to the shop. There were various household goods and some furniture, some of them partly burnt as if they tried to burn them there. Among them, a wooden bookshelf caught my eyes. At the time I was deeply into fantasy novels, and my collection of books were ever growing. The shelf would be perfect to order my collection. Dad also agreed the shelf looked good, so we picked it up, brought it back home together with our catch. The shelf was made of real wood and seemed to have been a DIY project. Things didn't quite fit, and here and there not perfect, but overall sturdy and had no damage or woodworm. There just were a few singed spots. Dad said somebody tried to smooth out the wood by torching the surface. He torched the rest of the surface to even it out, and indeed I was happy how it brought out the fine texture of the wood. We varnished it and left it out in the balcony to let it dry. And that night, in my dream, I saw myself lying in my own room, but I wasn't alone. There was a dark silhouette of a young boy, giggling, looking at me. The overall shape of the boy was but a dark shadow, but his laughing mouth and white teeth could I see clearly for some reason. He pointed his finger at me as his giggle got louder, but me in the dream seemed not being able to move at all. It was an odd dream, unpleasant even. But a dream is just a dream, isn't it? In the early morning, I took the bookshelf into my room and put my books in. I was happy to see my books in order. Soon it was time to go to school, and I was heading to the bathroom to get ready. I was stopped by the sound of books falling down. The window was closed, and the shelf was pretty deep, and yet 2 books fell from the bookshelf. It was odd, but I put them back and got on with my day. That night, I had another dream with a shadow boy. He was once again laughing and pointing at me. This time I shouted back, "What was so funny?" The boy went silent with his mouth shut tight. Then without a word, he went to the bookshelf. And started pushing my book off the shelf. "What are you doing?" I shouted. But me in the dream still could not move at all and had to helplessly watch on. When I woke up, the dawn was breaking and the room was in dim morning light. And there I saw my books on the floor. Exactly 3 of them from the top left, as I saw in the dream. Chills ran down my spine. I wanted to run to my parents right away, but I wasn't a young boy anymore, and could not make a fuss about a mere nightmare, could I? I put the book back on the shelf. Another night, and the shadow boy returned to my dream. This time he was already by the bookshelf and pushed my books off the shelf. When I woke up, this time I found 4 books on the floor. And that way I found 1 more book fallen from the shelf by each passing night. In the shelf were 15 books. When nearly 2 weeks passed and I found 14 books fallen on the floor, I could not contain my anxiety anymore. I explained what had been happening to Dad. He is by all means not superstitious and no-nonsense character, but he took my teary plea seriously. He took the shelf out. I heard he burnt it at the incinerator at his work. In whatever case, to my relief, my nightmare stopped with that. But there was one detail I didn't tell Dad. The last time I had a dream, the boy lifted his finger at me and said, "Next is your turn." I didn't know what was to happen or who that boy was, but I sure didn't want to find it out, and managed to get rid of the shelf just in time. And just a few months ago, I went back to the lake. By now I have become just as passionate hobby angler as my dad, and this time ventured out there by myself. It wasn't the remote corner once it was anymore, with new apartment blocks nearby. The shop by the lake too was now turned into a bigger, modern, convenient store. The owner of the store was a late middle-aged man. As I bought a few supplies, I talked about when I first visited the lake 5 years ago. It brought back the memory of the bookshelf and the dumpster where I first found it. To my surprise, the owner seemed to remember about the dumpster himself. After a pause, he said, 5 years ago, eh? I think it was then Mr. Kim's house caught on fire. Mr. Kim was one of his neighbors in that small, remote community, and one day his house caught on fire while Mr. Kim and his wife was out, and their little son alone died in it. The couple moved away shortly afterwards, and the pile of junks I saw were what they had left behind. This is from 2011. One day, Mom brought back a full-length mirror from the recycling dumpster in our apartment block. It was in a neat condition and thought it'd be useful for me, she said. I felt a bit apprehensive about using something somebody threw out, but the reflection of myself in the mirror seemed somewhat taller and slenderer, so I happily accepted it and put it in my room. Nothing much happened for a week afterwards, apart from feeling satisfied with my own reflection on the mirror every morning. But on the 8th day, I got sleep paralysis. I felt as if somebody was sucking me down from the bed. It was the first sleep paralysis for me, and I was more excited than scared. Would I see a ghost now? I opened my eyes almost hopefully. Nothing there. With a feeling of letdown, the paralysis broke, and soon I fell asleep and got a dream. I was in the long hallway of my apartment building, and a guy was chasing after me. Somehow I could not enter my apartment and had to just keep running down the hallway. But soon I reached a dead end. Panicking, I turned to look at the man in black, now quickly closing in. And I woke up. The whole situation felt so real, and my body was drenched with sweat as if I'd been really running. But I just thought it should be one of the usual nightmares I occasionally get. Nevertheless, I found it creepy enough to talk about it to my boyfriend later in the day. At night, I went to bed without any sense of anxiety. But I got another dream, starting from where the previous night's dream ended. I was there facing the dead end of the hallway and turned around to face the chaser. It was the first time I got a dream that continued from another, and even in the dream, I felt shaken. The man was very tall, very pale in the face, and was wearing a black fedora hat. Overall, he resembled the classic image of a Korean Grim Reaper. All I could think was, I was going to die now. But as if by magic, a door appeared on the wall behind me. Without a second thought, I opened it and jumped in. And strangely, I found myself in my room. Unlike the desperate situation and deathly panic I had just felt seconds ago, it was so calm and safe there, protected as if under a bunker. With a sigh of relief, I looked round, and at the window facing the hallway, that guy was looking in, glaring at me. If he could, he seemed to want to kill me with a glare alone. And then I woke up. Having suffered nightmare for the second night, I felt tired as if I hadn't slept at all. But I still didn't think too much of it, except that I updated what happened to my boyfriend. Only when night came, I started feeling a bit nerves. Would the dream return again? I talked to Mom about the dream. She's a devout Buddhist and put paintings of Dharma and Bodhisattva in my room too. She told me to bow towards the painting of Bodhisattva 3 times before bed, which I followed, and also chatted with my boyfriend on the phone till I fell asleep. It's what boyfriend only later told me, but when I fell asleep in the middle of the conversation, he stayed online, amused to hear my drowsy mumble. Suddenly the line went hazy with a static noise before it abruptly cut off. He tried to ring me again, but for some reason it failed to connect. And while all that was going on, I was back in that continuing dream, and I found myself in the safety of my room, except for the same creepy guy glaring death at me from the window. I looked away to avoid the intense gaze, but when I looked again, the man was gone. And God, I curse my curiosity. If it were in the horror film, I would be the curious friend of the main character that gets killed first. I opened the door of my room to check if the man was really gone. And just like that, the safe space of my room disappeared, and I found myself in a forest next second. The man was there, laughing a creepy scratch laugh that I'd never heard before. And with that laughter still ringing in my ears, I woke up. My body was drenched with sweat, and my breath was rough with panic. Having suffered disturbing dream for the 3rd night, I felt exhausted all day long. Even my usually stern boss at work suggested that I should catch a nap during lunch break. Night came again regardless, and I was talking to my boyfriend on the phone, discussing about the strange dream. He then mentioned that one of his friends had a certain spiritual gift. His grandma and aunt were shamans, and he himself could not clearly see ghosts or whatnot, but in any case possessed the spiritual sensitivity that ran in the family. My boyfriend suggested that we should meet him. I was honestly skeptical, but had nothing to lose and agreed to see him the following evening. After the phone call with him, I could not sleep despite feeling desperately tired. Actually, I didn't mind. No sleep meant no dream at all. I typed a text to my boyfriend. "I can't sleep. How wonderful!" And right that moment, I fell into sleep paralysis with my phone still in my hand. Again, I felt as if something was sucking me out of bed. And this time, I also had a hard time breathing, feeling a heavy weight on my chest. It was the loud noise from the front door my younger brother made as he came back late from cram school that broke my paralysis. I felt scared to fall asleep again. Hoping changing the scene might help, I fell asleep in the living room with all the lights on there. But it was all no use. I was back right in the dream, in that forest with a creepy guy laughing at me. I ran again. I was more than convinced I would die should they caught me. But catch me he did. He was much faster than in the first two dreams, and my desperate running was in vain. He started strangling me. I don't know if I died in the dream or not, but I woke up at that point. Because, thankfully, my brother heard me crying in my sleep and woke me up. I did not dare fall back to sleep again and surf the internet for the rest of the night. Mom started taking my dreams seriously too. She consulted the abbot of her regular temple. He gave her the prayer beads he'd been carrying, and Mom brought it all the way to my work during the day, telling me that I should wear it on my wrist. After work, I met my boyfriend and his friend as planned. The friend's face changed color visibly as soon as he looked at me. Apparently, before my boyfriend contacted him, he contacted the boyfriend first. The friend had a weird dream in which he saw a girl looking like me and a strange guy. By the way, we'd never met in person, but boyfriend had shown him my photos before. He sensed it wasn't any old dream, so called my boyfriend if everything was all right with him, if I wasn't seeing some other guy, perhaps. When boyfriend told him about the nightmares I'd been suffering, he visited his shaman grandma before he came to meet us that evening. What his grandma told him was, a very nasty, malicious spirit was after me. It was a powerful one, and I was barely surviving because of the grace from my guardian spirit of my ancestor. And it all came from the mirror my mom picked up. There were certain items one shouldn't pick up as second-hand, and especially if from a dubious source. And the mirror was one of the biggest taboos. The bigger the mirror, the greater the risk. And well, the mirror in my room was a full-length one indeed. She advised that I should get rid of the mirror right away, not in any careless way, but back to exactly where it was first found. I was dumbfounded. In the first place, I wasn't suspecting about the mirror at all. Could that really bring a mortal danger to me? And a guardian spirit, huh? But I was almost strangled to death in my last dream. Back home, I thought it was too late and I was too tired to take the mirror out. I sat in front of the TV in the living room, intending to stay awake for the night. But maybe because of alcohol I drank, I unwittingly dozed off, and I was right back in the dream, being strangled by the man. But I noticed his grip wasn't what it was the previous night. Could it be because of the prayer beads I was wearing? the grip got even weaker gradually, though his death glare stayed just as terrifying. And he opened his mouth for the first time. His metallic, grating voice was just as terrifying as if it had power to suck life out of me by itself. He said,
"Aren't you lucky?"
He finally let go of my throat. I ran away again, but his pursuit wasn't over yet, and chased me again. I ran and ran, till I found a little hut which looked somehow familiar. In front of the hut was a neatly dressed woman. I ran into her, and she embraced me tightly. The man glared at me just as intensely as he did earlier from the window, but seemed to be barred from getting nearer to the hut. The strange woman's bosom was so warm, like that of my mom's, and I bursted into tears. The woman stood up and shouted at the man. Or her face looked like shouting, because I actually couldn't hear what she said. And that finally made the man go away. Following morning, Mom told me about her dream, which surprised me. Mom was her grandma's favorite. Her grandpa wanted a son, and so didn't treat Mom well, but it only made her grandma dote on Mom more. Even with severe dementia at the end of her life, she didn't forget Mom's name alone. And that loving grandma appeared in my mom's dream the previous night with an angry face that Mom had never seen from her, and scolded Mom harshly. I wondered if my guardian spirit was Mom's grandma. Could that woman who saved me last night be her? I told Mom my dream, and she seemed equally surprised. We decided to throw away the mirror right that day, but Mom suggested to seek a shaman first to make everything sure. She seemed to be worried if the malicious spirit hadn't attached himself to me already. The shaman gave us a stinging stare, especially to Mom. "You almost ruined your daughter's life," she said, and then turned to me. "You've been to hell and back, haven't you? Now, tell me all." I actually didn't trust her fully, and I don't know if it was simply because of the shaman's trick, but I was soon telling her everything. "You are still alive thanks to your mom's good karma she's accumulated. She was tricked by the malicious thing. God, it is such a powerful spirit, and been stuck to the mirror for a long time too. Why the heck are you keeping it still when you were told to throw it out? Is it made with gold or something? Just put it back where it was," Shaman said, and wrote us 2 talismans, one to put on the back of the mirror before throwing out, and one for above my room door. First was to weaken the power of the spirit that was haunting the mirror, and the second was a protection just in case it was going to come back searching for me. On the way back home, Mom told me she indeed felt strange fancy for the mirror when she first saw it left among the other garbages, and that pool might have been the trick of the malicious spirit. She apologized to me again and again. Back home, we put the talisman as instructed, and finally took the mirror out to where it was, with a sign of warning not to take it. That night, while I slept so well, not having a single dream, Mom had another dream of her grandma. This time, she was dressed in a beautiful hanbok, the traditional dress, and danced. She looked so happy and joyous that Mom just joined her dance despite of herself. I took it that my ordeal was completely over. I don't know who that malicious spirit was and what was it with a mirror. Looking back, now I could say it was somewhat interesting experience, but I'd never ever want to go through such again. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. It's actually not my favorite subject, I must say, haunted objects. I love my bargains and never want to pay the full retail prices, so I do buy quite often second hand, from clothes, shoes, furniture, tablewares to electronics. Well, my vintage leather jacket doesn't seem to be giving me a sleep paralysis yet. So, if you enjoyed my work, please give it a like and a comment, and please consider subscribing to my channel. As the YouTube algorithm changes once again, it seems to be hitting small channels like mine even more. I'd really appreciate any little support in the form of a comment and subscription. I also have a Buy Me a Coffee account in case you want to support me more directly. The details you can find in the description. Buy Me a Coffee supporters get an early access to my new video. Thank you. I'll come back with something different next Sunday. Stay safe and take care.